In the grim darkness of the far future, there are fates that transcend death itself. Among the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines who serve as humanity's finest warriors, death in battle is considered an honor. To fall protecting the Imperium of man is to achieve glory that echoes through eternity. But for some warriors, even death is denied. Instead, they are granted what their brothers call a great honor, though those who experience it might whisper different truths in the darkness between battles. These are the Dreadnoughts, living tombs where heroes too valuable to lose are imprisoned within shells of adamantium and ceramite, their broken bodies sustained by arcane technology, while their consciousness pilots war machines of terrible power. They are revered as walking relics, as bridges to a past that grows ever more distant with each passing millennium. But what happens when one of these ancient warriors, a being who walked beside the Emperor of mankind himself during the glory days of the Great Crusade, falls into the hands of the Orks? What fate awaits a consciousness that has endured for 10,000 years, that carries memories of an age when the Imperium was young and the Emperor still walked among his sons, when such a warrior becomes not a revered relic, but a trophy to be desecrated by Xenos hands? This is not a tale of simple death. Death would be a mercy. This is a story about something far worse, a nightmare that combines the deepest fears of the Adeptus Astartes with the crude, brutal ingenuity of the greenskin menace. It is a story about what happens when the sacred becomes profane, when millennia of service and sacrifice are reduced to spare parts in an Ork mechboy's workshop. It is about a consciousness that remembers standing in the Emperor's presence, that fought at Olenor when the Great Crusade reached its zenith, trapped and aware while Xenos hands tear apart everything that made it whole. To understand the full horror of this fate, we must first understand what a dreadnought truly is, and what it means to be one of the ancient ones who remember when humanity's master still walked the stars in person. A Space Marine dreadnought is far more than simply a weapon of war, though it is certainly that. Standing between 3 and 5 meters tall, these walking battle tanks are armored in layers of ceramite and adamantium, thick enough to shrug off hits that would obliterate lesser vehicles. They bristle with weapons ranging from assault cannons and lascannons to missile launchers and power fists capable of crushing battle tanks. On the battlefield, they are engines of destruction, walking fortresses that inspire awe in allies and terror in enemies. But the true nature of a dreadnought lies not in its weapons or armor, but in what rests at its heart. Within the armored sarcophagus at the center of each dreadnought is a Space Marine, or what remains of one. The process of becoming a dreadnought is not chosen. It is a fate that befalls only those warriors who have been so catastrophically wounded that even the legendary resilience of a Space Marine cannot save them. When a battle brother suffers injuries that would kill any other being 10 times over, when his body is shattered beyond what even the chapter's apothecaries can repair, a terrible choice must be made. The warrior could be granted the Emperor's peace, allowed to die with honor and have his gene seed harvested for the next generation. Or, if his deeds have been great enough, if his tactical wisdom is deemed too valuable to lose, he may be offered another path. He may be interred within a dreadnaught's sarcophagus, his ruined body reduced to little more than a brain and a handful of vital organs suspended in amniotic fluid, permanently fused with the life support systems of the war machine that will become his eternal prison. The transformation is brutal. Everything that makes the warrior human in form is stripped away. Arms and legs are amputated. Unnecessary organs are removed. The flesh is pared down until only the absolute minimum needed to sustain consciousness remains. What is left is installed into the armored shell at the dreadnaught's core, hardwired directly into the machine's systems through neural interface ports that pierce the brain itself. The Marine's mind becomes the machine's mind. His senses are replaced by the dreadnaught's sensors, his voice by its vox speakers, his body by tons of armored ceramite and adamantium. He will never again feel the weight of a bolter in his hands, never again know the simple pleasure of walking on his own legs. He becomes something trapped between life and death, neither fully one nor the other, sustained in an existence that can stretch for thousands of years. This is presented to the wounded warrior as a great honor, and in a sense, it is. To be chosen for such preservation means that the chapter values his experience and wisdom above all else. Dreadnoughts serve as living links to their chapter's history, their memories stretching back across centuries or even millennia. Some dreadnoughts are so ancient that they remember events from their chapter's founding, can recite the names of heroes long since turned to dust, can speak with authority about battles fought before any living space marine was born. They are walking libraries of tactical knowledge and strategic wisdom, consulted by chapter masters and captains when difficult decisions must be made. They are symbols of continuity and tradition, proof that the chapter's greatest heroes never truly die but continue to serve the Emperor unto the very ending of the universe. But there is a cost to this immortality, a price that is rarely spoken of in the official doctrines of the Adeptus Astartes. The Dreadnought pilots spend most of their existence in a state of suspended animation, sleeping dreamlessly in the darkness between deployments. When they are awakened for battle, the transition is jarring and disorienting. They emerge from the void of unconsciousness to find that years or even decades have passed in what seems like an instant. The brothers they fought alongside in their last deployment may be dead or retired. The chapter may have changed in ways both subtle and profound. The galaxy itself moves on while they sleep, and each awakening brings with it the realization that they are becoming ever more disconnected from the world around them. Worse still is what happens to the human mind, subjected to this existence over truly vast stretches of time. The organic brain, even one enhanced by the modifications that create a space marine, was never meant to endure for millennia. Slowly, inevitably, the Dreadnought pilot begins to lose pieces of himself. Memories fade and blur together. The ability to feel emotions dulls and diminishes. The warrior, who was once a man of flesh and blood, who knew joy and sorrow and anger and love, gradually becomes something else. He becomes more machine than man, his consciousness reduced to tactical imperatives and combat protocols, his sense of self eroding like ancient stone, worn smooth by endless millennia of wind and rain. The truly ancient dreadnoughts, those who have endured for thousands of years, often retain little of their original personalities. They are shells animated by duty and purpose, their humanity having leaked away so slowly they never noticed it was gone. And yet, for all the horror inherent in such an existence, dreadnoughts are treated with reverence, bordering on worship by their chapters. They are accorded tremendous respect, their counsel sought, their presence on the battlefield a source of inspiration for younger battle brothers. In the Baroque traditions of the Adeptus Astartes, to become a dreadnought is seen as a reward for exceptional service, a way to transcend the normal span of a space marine's life and continue fighting for the Emperor long after flesh would have failed. The dreadnoughts themselves often cling to this narrative, finding purpose in the belief that their sacrifice means something, that their extended existence serves a greater cause. They are heroes. They are honored. They are revered. They are everything a space marine should aspire to become. Until something goes wrong. Until the unthinkable happens. Until the ancient warrior finds himself not in the honored halls of his chapter's fortress monastery, but in the crude and brutal hands of the enemy. To fully grasp the magnitude of what it means for a dreadnought to be captured by Orks, particularly one who walked during the days of the Great Crusade, we must understand who these ancient warriors are and what they carry within their armored shells. We must travel back 10,000 years to an age when the Emperor of mankind still lived and breathed and led his armies in person, when the galaxy was being forged into the Imperium that would come to dominate the stars, when hope still burned bright in the hearts of humanity's champions, the Emperor of mankind. Even speaking that title carries weight, invokes power beyond mortal comprehension. He was, and in a sense still is, the single most powerful human psyker to ever exist. An immortal being who had walked among humanity since before recorded history, guiding and protecting the species through dark ages and golden eras alike. He finally revealed himself during the collapse known as the Age of Strife. When warp storms isolated human worlds from one another, when Xenos predators descended upon defenseless colonies, when the very fabric of human civilization seemed ready to tear itself apart, he emerged from the shadows where he had worked for millennia and took direct control of humanity's destiny. First, he united Terra itself, the birthplace of humanity. The Emperor waged the unification wars, crushing the techno-barbarian warlords who had carved the cradle of mankind into petty kingdoms and brutal fiefdoms. He created the Thunder Warriors, the first of his gene-enhanced super soldiers, and with them he brought all of Earth under his rule. But that was only the beginning. The Emperor's vision extended far beyond a single planet. He looked to the stars and saw what humanity could become, what it must become if it was to survive in a galaxy filled with threats beyond imagining. The Emperor created the Space Marine Legions, gene-forged warriors built from his own genetic template. He crafted the Primarchs, 20 beings who were to be his generals and his sons, each one a masterwork of genetic engineering and psychic power. He forged alliances with the Mechanicum of Mars, securing the industrial might needed to build a war machine capable of conquering a galaxy. And then, when all was ready, he launched the Great Crusade. The Great Crusade was nothing less than the reconquest of the galaxy in humanity's name. For 200 years, the Emperor led his forces across the stars, bringing lost human worlds back into the fold, destroying Xenos empires that had preyed upon humanity during the Age of Strife, spreading the imperial truth that promised to enlighten mankind and free them from superstition and false gods. It was an age of glory unmatched before or since. The Emperor walked among his warriors. His Primarchs led armies numbering in the millions. The Space Marine Legions were invincible, unstoppable, righteous in their purpose, and terrible in their power. And then came Ullanor. The Ullanor Crusade represents the absolute apex of the Great Crusade, the moment when the Imperium of man reached its greatest triumph. The Ork Empire of Ullanor Prime was vast beyond measure, a threat so large that it required the deployment of hundreds of thousands of space marines, millions upon millions of Imperial Army soldiers, and the direct intervention of the Emperor himself. The greenskin overlord Urlak Urg had built an empire that rivaled anything humanity had achieved since the Dark Age of technology. His orcs were larger, more numerous, and more dangerous than any seen before or since, save perhaps for the beast who would rise millennia later. The Emperor did not simply send his armies to deal with this threat. He went himself. He led the final assault on Ullanor Prime in person, his golden armor shining like a second sun on the battlefield, his power unmatched by any save perhaps his greatest sons. To fight in that battle, to stand in the Emperor's presence as he waged war against the greatest Ork empire the galaxy had ever seen, was to experience something that transcended ordinary glory. It was to witness divinity made manifest, to see power so vast that reality itself seemed to bend around it, to know with absolute certainty that humanity had a protector whose might could overcome any foe. For the Space Marines who fought at Ullanor, that day became the defining moment of their existence. They had fought alongside the master of mankind himself. They had seen him in all his glory and his terrible wrath. They had been part of the greatest victory of the age, the triumph that would be celebrated with parades and honors and declarations that would echo through history. Many of those warriors would later fall in the wars that followed. Many would die during the Horus Heresy, the terrible civil war that tore the Imperium apart and ended the Great Crusade in fire and betrayal. But some survived. Some endured through the dark millennium that followed. And some of those survivors, when their bodies finally failed them in battles yet to come, were deemed valuable enough to be interred within Dreadnought sarcophagi, there to sleep and wake and sleep again, across the 10,000 years that separated the age of glory from the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Imagine being such a warrior. Imagine carrying within your consciousness actual memories of the Emperor as he was before the Golden Throne, before the Horus Heresy, before everything went wrong. Imagine remembering his voice, not as a whisper in the warp or a faint psychic impression, but as actual words spoken to you directly. Imagine knowing what it felt like to stand in his presence, to feel the weight of his attention upon you, to receive orders from his own lips. Imagine holding those memories for 10,000 years, watching as the Imperium he built slowly decayed into a theocratic nightmare that would have disgusted him, seeing his vision of a rational, enlightened humanity twisted into a feudal empire that worships him as a god despite his hatred of all religion. For a dreadnought who fought at Olenor, who stood in the Emperor's presence during the greatest triumph of the Great Crusade, those memories are both a treasure and a torment. They are proof that the warrior once lived in an age of wonders, that he served something greater than the grim survival that characterizes the Imperium in its current state. They are a connection to a past when things were better, when humanity was on the rise rather than slowly falling into decay. But they are also a reminder of everything that has been lost, of how far the Imperium has fallen from the Emperor's original vision, of how the bright hope of the Great Crusade has curdled into the desperate darkness of endless war. These memories make such a dreadnought invaluable to his chapter. He is not simply an ancient warrior with millennia of tactical experience. He is a living link to the very founding of the Imperium, a consciousness that can speak with authority about the Emperor's intentions and methods, a relic more precious than any artifact or holy weapon. Such a dreadnought would be consulted on the most important decisions, his words carrying weight that no other voice could match. He would be revered not just as a hero, but as something approaching a saint, a bridge between the present age and the golden past when the Emperor walked among his people, and then, impossibly, catastrophically, he falls into Ork hands. The ancient warrior, the one who met the Emperor, the precious repository of memories from an age of glory, becomes a prisoner of the most brutal and crude Xenos race in the galaxy. To understand what happens next, we must turn our attention to the Orks themselves, to their culture of looting and scavenging, to their particular delight in taking what belongs to their enemies and making it Orky. The Orks are a plague upon the galaxy, a green tide of violence and destruction that spreads across the stars like a cancer. They are not a unified empire or a cohesive civilization in any normal sense. Instead, they are a collection of countless warbands and tribes, each led by the biggest and strongest Ork who can hold power through sheer physical dominance. They live only for war, existing in a state of perpetual conflict that sees them fighting everyone and anyone, including each other, when no better targets present themselves. They reproduce through spores, making them nearly impossible to fully eradicate from any world they infest. They possess a crude but effective form of psychic power that makes their ramshackle technology actually work, despite defying all rational engineering principles. But perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Ork culture, beyond their love of violence, is their obsession with looting. Orks are compulsive scavengers, driven by an almost pathological need to acquire, modify, and repurpose anything they can get their hands on. This behavior is most pronounced in the Death Skulls clan, whose members are legendary even among other Orks for their willingness to acquire anything that is not nailed down, and quite a few things that are. To a Death Skull, the entire galaxy is a treasure trove waiting to be looted, and the concept of ownership is merely a suggestion that applies to everyone except himself. Orks loot for practical reasons. Their own technology, while effective thanks to their psychic gestalt field that makes things work if enough orcs believe they should, is still crude and prone to breaking down. A good Imperial lasgun or a sturdy Space Marine bolter can be worth a dozen orc weapons in terms of reliability and effectiveness. Imperial vehicles are prized because they are well made and can often be kept running with minimal maintenance, unlike orc vehicles which require constant repairs and modifications just to continue functioning. But orcs also loot for status. The biggest, flashiest, most impressive loot marks its owner as a successful warrior, someone who has fought in real battles and come away with proper trophies. Among orcs, a good collection of loot is as important as personal size and strength in determining one's place in the hierarchy. Orc mechboys, the technical specialists of orc society, are particularly obsessed with looting. They see every piece of captured technology as a new challenge, a puzzle to be solved and then improved upon. The idea of using something exactly as it was designed is foreign to orc thinking. Instead, mechboys immediately begin modifying and improving anything they capture, adding more guns, more armor, more speed, and copious amounts of dakka. The result is usually a Frankensteined monstrosity that barely resembles its original form, covered in riveted plates and festooned with oversized weapons, painted in garish colors and decorated with crude glyphs and kill markings. The orcs have a long and storied history of looting Imperial vehicles. Leman Russ battle tanks are particular favorites, solid and reliable machines that can take tremendous punishment and keep rolling. The orcs will capture these tanks, strip out anything they deem unnecessary, bolt on additional armor plates, replace the weapons with orc equivalents, and slap on a new paint job. The result is what the Imperium classifies as a looted wagon, a formerly Imperial vehicle that has been thoroughly orcified. These looted vehicles are common enough that Imperial forces expect to see them on any battlefield where orcs are present, a galling reminder that the Xenos are using humanity's own weapons against them. But Leman Russ tanks are mere trifles compared to the truly impressive loot that orcs sometimes acquire. There are legends of orc looters who have captured Imperial knights, the towering war machines piloted by noble houses and revered as symbols of Imperial might. There are confirmed reports of orcs looting titans, the god machines of the Collegia Titanica, and attempting to make them operational under greenskin control. The larger and more impressive the loot, the more status it brings to the orc who claims it. And in this hierarchy of desirability, in this ranking of the most prestigious trophies an orc can claim, a Space Marine Dreadnought occupies a very special place. Dreadnoughts are rare. Unlike the millions of guardsmen who fight for the Imperium, unlike the thousands of tanks and aircraft that roll off Forge World assembly lines, Dreadnoughts are precious relics that exist in very limited numbers. Most Space Marine chapters possess only a handful of these ancient war machines, and each one represents irreplaceable heritage and history. They are accorded enormous respect by their chapters, treated as sacred relics as much as weapons of war. And they are powerful. A single Dreadnought can turn the tide of a battle, its heavy weapons and thick armor allowing it to operate as a one-machine wrecking crew that tears through enemy formations with impunity. For an orc mech boy, a Dreadnought represents the ultimate challenge and the ultimate prize. Here is a war machine that combines the best of Imperial technology with the biological integration of a living pilot, creating something that is both vehicle and warrior, both machine and monster. The technical complexity involved in creating and maintaining a Dreadnought is beyond anything the orcs could produce themselves, which makes it all the more valuable as loot. To capture a Dreadnought would bring immense prestige. To successfully loot it, to pry open its secrets and potentially even make it operational under orc control, would elevate a mech boy to legendary status among his peers. But capturing a Dreadnought is no easy task. These war machines are formidable combatants, designed to operate in the most intense battlefield conditions and survive threats that would destroy lesser units. Their armor is thick enough to turn aside anti-tank weapons. Their targeting systems are sophisticated enough to track and eliminate multiple threats simultaneously. Their pilots are veterans with centuries or even millennia of combat experience, tactical minds that have fought in more battles than most warriors will ever see. Taking down a dreadnought requires overwhelming firepower, clever tactics, or extraordinary luck. Even when a dreadnought falls, its chapter will fight with desperate ferocity to recover it, unwilling to let such a precious relic fall into enemy hands. And yet, in the vast and terrible galaxy of Warhammer 40,000, the unlikely and the impossible happen with disturbing regularity. Battles go wrong, tactical situations collapse, heroic last stands end in defeat rather than victory. And sometimes, despite every precaution and every prayer to the Emperor, a dreadnought falls. Not just falls in the sense of being destroyed, where the pilot can at least find peace in death and the chapter can recover the sarcophagus for respectful interment, but falls in the sense of being disabled and captured, its pilot still alive, still conscious, still aware of everything that is happening as Xenos hands drag the sacred war machine away from the battlefield. Now imagine that this captured dreadnought is not some newly interred warrior with a mere century or two of service. Imagine instead that it is one of the ancient ones, a consciousness that has endured for 10,000 years, that fought in the Great Crusade itself, that stood in the Emperor's presence at Ullanor and heard the master of mankind speak. Imagine the horror of such a warrior finding himself in Ork hands, helpless and aware as crude greenskin mechanics begin to examine the sarcophagus that has been his home for millennia. The battle that leads to such a catastrophic capture might happen in any number of ways. Perhaps the dreadnought is deployed to defend a critical location, and the tide of Orks proves too numerous to hold back. Perhaps he becomes separated from his battle brothers during a chaotic melee, surrounded and overwhelmed before support can arrive. Perhaps his war machine suffers a catastrophic malfunction at the worst possible moment, leaving him immobilized as the green tide washes over his position. However it happens, the result is the same. The ancient warrior, the venerable hero who has served for 10 millennia, finds himself defeated and in the hands of the enemy. The initial moments of capture are disorienting. The dreadnought's last memories are of combat, of fighting desperately against impossible odds, of systems failing and weapons running dry. Then darkness, either from damage to his senses or from the Orks physically shutting down his systems. When awareness returns, the situation has changed completely. The sounds of battle have faded, replaced by the crude grunting and bellowing of Ork voices. The dreadnought's sensors, if they are still functional, show not the familiar confines of his chapter's fortress monastery or the interior of a transport craft, but the ramshackle, filth-encrusted interior of an Ork workshop or mech shop. The warrior trapped within the sarcophagus tries to access his weapon systems, tries to power up his locomotors and break free from whatever restraints the Orks have placed on him. Nothing responds. Either the systems have been damaged beyond his ability to activate them, or the Orks have had enough time to properly secure their prize, disconnecting power feeds and locking down actuators. The dreadnought is awake, aware, conscious of everything happening around him, but utterly unable to act. He is a prisoner in the most literal and horrible sense, trapped within a shell of adamantium that has become not a weapon, but a cage. The Orks, meanwhile, are ecstatic with their prize. Capturing a Space Marine dreadnought is the kind of feat that makes Orks legendary among their kind. The mech boys who claimed it immediately begin calling in their fellows, summoning every tech-obsessed greenskin in the vicinity to come and see what they have acquired. There is arguing and posturing as multiple mech boys try to claim ownership or at least partial credit for the capture. There may even be fights, Orks settling the question of who gets to work on this magnificent loot in the traditional way, through violence and the brutal application of superior strength. Eventually, some semblance of order is established. The biggest or most intimidating or most technically accomplished, Mechboy asserts his authority over the prize. though he will likely allow other mech boys to assist and consult, partly because the work ahead is too complex for one orc to handle alone, and partly because even orcs understand that exceptional loot should be shared, at least among those with the proper appreciation for fine dakka. The Dreadnought is hauled to a work area, a space that would make any Mechanicus tech priest weep in horror. Oil and grease cover every surface. Half-finished projects litter the floor. Crude tools lie scattered about with no apparent organization. The whole place reeks of promethium fumes and ozone and the distinctive musk of orc physiology. The mech boys begin their examination. Their approach to understanding technology is radically different from the ritualized, methodical procedures of the Adeptus Mechanicus, where a tech priest would spend hours in prayer and preparation before even touching such a sacred machine, where they would carefully consult ancient schemas and blessed texts. Orcs simply start poking and prodding and hitting things to see what happens. They walk around the Dreadnought, studying it from every angle, pointing out features to one another in their guttural language. They tap on the armor plates with crude wrenches, listening to the sound and nodding sagely as if this tells them something significant. They peer into the weapon housings, examining the assault cannons and power fists with the critical eye of mechanics who have seen a lot of dakka in their time. The workshop itself is a monument to orc engineering philosophy, which could be summarized as, if it works, keep hitting it until it works better. The walls are covered in tool racks, though covered might be too generous a word for the haphazard way wrenches and hammers and welding torches are scattered about. Some tools look like they might have once been Imperial equipment, looted from battlefields and repurposed for orc use. Others are clearly orc-made, crude but effective implements designed for the kind of rough work that mech boys specialize in. Grease and oil stain every surface, the residue of countless projects and repairs accumulating into a permanent coating that gives everything a slick, unwholesome sheen. Various projects in different stages of completion occupy floor space throughout the workshop. Over in one corner sits what might once have been a chimera transport, now so heavily modified that identifying its original form requires close examination. The orcs have added armor plates that make it look like a moving fortress, installed weapons that seem far too large for the chassis to support, and painted it in an eye-searing combination of blue and yellow that makes the ancient warrior's optical sensors momentarily glitch when they pass over it. In another area, a collection of engines and power plants sit in various states of disassembly, Gretchen crawling over them like insects as they strip out components on orders from their mech boy masters. The noise level in the workshop is incredible, a constant cacophony of hammering and welding and shouting. Orcs bellow orders to Gretchen, who squeal in protest or pain when cuffed for being too slow. Power tools whine and scream as they're applied to metal. Somewhere in the background, something is making a rhythmic clanking sound, a broken machine or poorly assembled device that nobody has bothered to fix because it still technically works. The ancient warrior can hear all of this through his audio sensors, and it grates on consciousness accustomed to the relative quiet and order of a space marine facility. The smells, transmitted through chemical sensors that analyze air composition, are equally offensive. Promethium fumes hang heavy in the air, the result of careless handling and inadequate ventilation. Ozone from welding operations creates sharp, acrid notes. And underlying everything is the distinctive musk of orcs themselves, a combination of fungal spores and aggressive pheromones and whatever passes for sweat among these xenos. It is an assault on every sense the ancient warrior possesses, a constant reminder that he is in an alien environment utterly unlike anything he has experienced in 10,000 years of service. The mech boys themselves are a varied lot, each one bearing the marks of their dangerous profession. The biggest among them, the one who claimed primary ownership of the Dreadnought, is missing 2 fingers on his left hand, evidence of some past accident involving machinery and insufficient caution. His skin bears burn scars from welding mishaps and chemical splashes. He wears what might charitably be called protective gear, though it consists mainly of a leather apron so stained with oil and other substances that its original color is impossible to determine. Tools hang from his belt, clanking against each other as he moves, and his eyes gleam with the particular light of someone who sees the universe primarily as a collection of things to be taken apart and put back together in more interesting configurations. The other mech boys defer to this one, though not without occasional grumbling and argument. Ork society is fundamentally hierarchical, organized around the principle that the biggest and strongest gets to be in charge. But mech boys complicate this with their technical expertise. A smaller orc, who knows how to make really good dakka, might command respect that his size alone would not grant him. The group examining the Dreadnought represents a temporary alliance of specialists, each bringing their own expertise to the examination of this exceptional prize, each jockeying for position and credit, while ostensibly cooperating on the task at hand. As they work their way around the Dreadnought, the mech boys provide a running commentary on what they observe. Their language is crude but expressive, filled with technical jargon that has evolved over millennia of Ork engineering. They discuss the thickness of the armor plating, comparing it favorably to the tin can protection of lesser Imperial vehicles. They examine the joints and actuators, noting with approval how smoothly the Dreadnought's limbs articulate even in its current inactive state. They spend considerable time studying the weapons, the assault cannon in particular drawing admiring comments about its rate of fire and the satisfying chunky sound it presumably makes when shooting. But what really fascinates them is the power plant. Dreadnoughts are powered by compact fusion cores or other advanced energy sources, technology that is well beyond normal Ork capabilities, even if they would never admit it. The mech boys can tell that whatever is generating power in this machine is something special, something far more sophisticated than the crude generators they normally work with. They debate among themselves about whether they could extract the power plant and use it for other purposes, perhaps installing it in a stomper or some other project worthy of such advanced technology. This discussion troubles the ancient warrior, who realizes that the Orks might decide his value lies not in operating him as a complete unit, but in harvesting him for parts. For the Dreadnought pilot, this examination is a special kind of torment. He can hear the Orks discussing him, can feel the vibrations through his sarcophagus as they bang on his armor, can sense through whatever sensors are still functioning that these crude Xenos are examining him like some kind of prize animal or captured trophy. He tries again to activate his weapons, to power up his systems, and show these greenskins what happens to those who dare defile a servant of the Emperor. Nothing happens. The power feeds remain disconnected. The weapons stay cold and inert. The mech boys eventually work up the courage to start opening access panels and examining the Dreadnought's internal systems. This is done with far less care than any Imperial mechanic would ever show. Panels are pried open with crowbars when the locking mechanisms prove too complex to understand. Delicate sensors and servos are manhandled without any regard for the precision required to keep them functioning. The mech boys grunt in satisfaction when they successfully open a compartment, and curse in frustration when seals or locks prove too stubborn to break. Gretchen are ordered to fetch tools and supplies, the smaller greenskins scurrying around the workshop in response to shouted commands and occasional blows from their larger masters. The really disturbing moment comes when the mech boys find the sarcophagus itself. Unlike the external armor and weapons systems, which are clearly mechanical in nature, the sarcophagus presents a puzzle. It is sealed tight, a reinforced container at the heart of the Dreadnought from which power cables and neural interface connections run to every other system. The mech boys can tell that something important is inside, something that makes the whole machine work. They debate among themselves about whether to open it, some arguing that cracking it open might damage whatever is inside, others insisting that they need to see what is in there if they are ever going to understand how this magnificent machine works. Inside the sarcophagus, the ancient warrior can only wait and wonder. He knows what comes next if the Orks decide to force open his armored shell. He knows that once they see what is inside, once they understand that the Dreadnought is piloted by a living being rather than some kind of machine spirit, their crude curiosity will take new and more horrible directions. He considers whether it might be possible to will himself to death, to simply stop fighting, to maintain consciousness, and let the biological functions that keep him alive slowly fail. But Space Marines do not surrender. They do not give up. Even entombed in a Dreadnought, even in the hands of the enemy, the warrior's conditioning and training keep him going. He endures because that is what a Space Marine does. The mech boys eventually make their decision. They are going to open the sarcophagus. The process takes time. The seals are designed to resist exactly this kind of tampering, incorporating both physical locks and consecrated wards that should, in theory, prevent unauthorized access. But Ork ingenuity, if it can be called that, has a way of overcoming obstacles that should be impossible. The mech boys try various tools and techniques. They attempt to drill through the seals, only to find that the metal is too hard for their crude bits. They try using pry bars to force the hatches, but the mechanisms resist even Ork's strength. They consider using explosives, though cooler heads prevail when someone points out that blowing up the sarcophagus might damage whatever is inside. Eventually, through a combination of brute force, persistence, and sheer dumb luck, the mech boys find a way in. There is a hiss of escaping gases as seals that have remained intact for millennia finally give way. Warning lights that have not illuminated in years suddenly begin to flash on the sarcophagus's limited external displays, alerting anyone who cares to notice that the containment vessel has been compromised. The mech boys lever the armored shell open, and for the first time in however many thousands of years it has been since his internment, the ancient warrior is exposed to unfiltered outside air. The Orks crowd around to see what they have found. Their reactions are varied. Some are disappointed, having perhaps expected to find some kind of powerful engine or weapon inside, rather than the shriveled, pathetic remnant of what was once a mighty space marine. Others are fascinated, leaning in close to examine the tubes and wires that connect the biological remains to the machine, pointing out particular features and speculating about their function. A few seem to grasp the significance of what they are looking at, understanding in their crude way that this is not just a machine, but a hybrid of flesh and steel, a warrior who has become one with his weapon. For the warrior himself, this exposure is a violation beyond words. The last time he saw the outside world, without the filtered perception of the Dreadnaught's senses, was before his internment, back when he still had eyes of flesh and blood. Now, those are long gone, replaced by the sensor pods and optical equipment that feed data directly into his brain. But he can still sense the change, can feel the difference in the air around his biological remnants, can detect through his remaining senses that the sanctity of his sarcophagus has been breached. He is exposed, vulnerable, helpless before the enemy in a way that no space marine should ever be. The mech boys do not understand what they have found, not really. They see a collection of meat and machinery, a biological component that somehow makes the whole Dreadnought work. Their instinct is to poke and prod, to try to understand through direct experimentation. They touch things they should not touch, disconnect cables to see what happens, examine the amniotic fluids that sustain the warrior's remaining organs with the critical eye of mechanics who have never seen anything quite like this before. Each touch, each casual manipulation of systems that have kept the warrior alive for millennia sends new sensations of wrongness and violation through what remains of his nervous system. The psychological impact of this situation on the ancient warrior is almost impossible to overstate. He has existed for 10,000 years as a Dreadnought. He has fought in countless battles, served through dozens or hundreds of campaigns, been consulted on matters of the utmost importance to his chapter. He carries within his mind actual memories of the Emperor, of the Great Crusade, of an age when humanity was ascendant and the Imperium was a gleaming beacon of hope rather than a slowly decaying corpse empire. Those memories have sustained him through millennia of existence in the half-life of a Dreadnought, They have given his endless service meaning and purpose. They are proof that he once served something greater, something worth the terrible sacrifice of his humanity. And now he is being taken apart by Orks. Crude Xenos who understand nothing of the Emperor's vision, nothing of the Great Crusade's glory, nothing of the sacrifice and service that the Dreadnought represents. They see only a piece of loot, a curious machine to be examined and possibly repurposed for their own brutal ends. The ancient warrior's memories of standing in the Emperor's presence, of hearing the master of mankind's voice, of fighting in the greatest triumph of the Great Crusade, feel like they belong to someone else, to a different person in a different age. How can such glorious memories coexist with the degradation of the present moment? How can a consciousness that holds such treasures be reduced to this, to meat, in a jar being poured over by greenskins in a filthy workshop? The mech boys continue their examination. They are slowly piecing together how the Dreadnought works, understanding in their crude way that the biological component is somehow controlling the mechanical systems. This gives them ideas. If a living thing can pilot this machine, then perhaps an Ork could pilot it. Perhaps they could remove the Imperial pilot and install one of their own, creating an Ork Dreadnought far superior to the ramshackle death dreads they normally use. The idea excites them. They begin discussing the possibility, gesturing animatedly as they plan how they might achieve such a thing. For the ancient warrior, this represents a new level of horror. It is one thing to be captured, to be examined, even to be killed. But the idea that these Xenos might try to remove him from his sarcophagus and install an Ork in his place, that his 10,000-year-old war machine might be perverted into a vehicle for greenskin violence, is almost unbearable. He would rather the Orks destroyed the Dreadnought entirely than see it so debased. He would rather they killed him and used his remains for target practice than allow his sacred machine to be operated by an Ork. But the warrior has no say in what happens next. He is helpless, his consciousness imprisoned in a body that consists of little more than a brain and a few vital organs. He cannot move, cannot speak except through Vox systems the Orks have disconnected, cannot act in any way to influence his fate. All he can do is endure and hope that somehow, impossibly, his chapter will find him. He clings to that hope, even as the mech boys close the sarcophagus back up, even as they begin discussing how to make the whole machine more Orky, even as they start planning modifications that will turn the sacred Dreadnought into just another piece of greenskin technology. The mech boys decide that before they try anything as complicated as swapping out the pilot, they should first make sure they can actually operate the Dreadnought. This means figuring out how to power it up and how to control its movements and weapons. They begin tracing power lines and control cables, trying to understand the logic of the system. This is complicated by the fact that Imperial technology is designed to be resistant to tampering, incorporating security measures and fail-safes that prevent unauthorized activation. The machine spirit of the Dreadnought, that semi-sentient presence that emerges from the interaction of ancient programming and consecrated components, actively resists Ork attempts to control it. But Orks are nothing if not persistent. When subtle approaches fail, they resort to brute force. They bypass security systems by ripping out entire control boards and replacing them with crude Ork equivalents. They override failsafes by simply disconnecting them. They solve the problem of incompatible power sources by connecting the Dreadnought to a massive generator that pumps energy into its systems with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face. Sparks fly, warning lights flash, alarms that have not sounded in millennia suddenly begin wailing their electronic distress calls. And slowly, grudgingly, the Dreadnought begins to respond to Ork commands. The ancient warrior feels his systems coming back online, but they respond to inputs he is not providing. He tries to assert control, to override the Ork manipulations and take back command of his own body. But the mech boys have been thorough in their rewiring. His neural interfaces have been disconnected or rerouted. His control pathways have been interrupted. He is aware of everything that is happening, can feel the Dreadnought moving and responding, but he cannot direct those movements. He is a passenger in his own body, forced to experience the sensation of the Orks puppeting his war machine like some kind of grotesque toy. The mech boys get the Dreadnought to take a few stumbling steps. They are delighted with this success, hooting and hollering as the ancient war machine lurches forward under their crude control. They attempt to activate the weapons systems, and after several failures, manage to get the assault cannon to spin up and fire a burst that tears through the wall of the workshop and probably kills several unfortunate Gretchen who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is deemed a rousing success. The mech boys congratulate themselves on their mechanical genius and begin planning the next phase of their work. That next phase involves making the Dreadnought properly Orky. The mech boys cannot simply use an Imperial war machine without modifying it to fit Ork aesthetic sensibilities. This means adding more weapons, more armor, and most importantly, a proper paint job. They begin by bolting additional armor plates onto the Dreadnought's exterior, heavy slabs of crude metal that add weight and bulk without providing much actual protection. They weld on weapon mounts for additional guns, planning to festoon the Dreadnought with as much dakka as it can physically carry. They discuss what color to paint it, with blue being popular among Death Skulls for its lucky properties, though red is also considered because red makes things go faster, and a fast Dreadnought would be truly terrifying. The actual painting process is conducted with about as much care and precision as one would expect from Orks. They do not sand down the surfaces, or apply primer, or use multiple thin coats. Instead, they slap on thick layers of paint with crude brushes, covering the Dreadnought's sacred livery with garish Ork colors. They paint crude glyphs and kill markings onto the armor. They add Ork iconography, symbols of Gork and Mork, or clan markings, or just random designs that some mech boy thought looked good. By the time they are finished, the Dreadnought barely resembles its original form. The colors and heraldry of its chapter are buried under layers of Ork paint. The clean lines and purposeful design of Imperial engineering are obscured by haphazard additions and modifications. For the warrior inside, this desecration is a form of torture more effective than any physical pain could be. He has worn his chapter's colors for 10,000 years. Those colors represent his identity, his allegiance, his connection to brothers living and dead. They are symbols of everything he has fought for, everything he has sacrificed, everything that has given his endless existence meaning and purpose. And now, they are being painted over by Xenos, replaced with crude Ork markings that mock everything the Dreadnought represents. Each brushstroke feels like a violation. Each crude glyph added to his armor is another desecration of everything he holds sacred. The paint itself is thick and sticky, applied without primer or proper preparation, and the ancient warrior can sense through his external senses how it obscures the fine details of his original livery. The chapter heraldry that took skilled artificers weeks to apply, the honor markings that commemorate specific battles and achievements, the sacred seals that invoke the Emperor's protection, all of it disappearing under layers of garish Ork colors. The colors themselves are offensive on multiple levels. The Orks have chosen a combination of blue and yellow, apparently believing that blue brings luck, while yellow makes things more shooty. These are not the dignified colors of his chapter, carefully chosen to honor traditions stretching back to the Great Crusade. These are the crude pigments of a species that understands aesthetics only in terms of how loud and garish something can be made. The blue is too bright, almost eye-searing in its intensity. The yellow clashes with it in ways that make the ancient warrior's optical sensors register the color combination as actively unpleasant. But worse than the colors themselves are the symbols being painted onto his armor. Ork glyphs representing Gork and Mork, the green-skinned gods of cunning brutality and brutal cunning, respectively. Kill markings that the Orks are adding as if the Dreadnought had made those kills while under their control. Crude drawings of shooters and choppers and other Ork weapons, decorating the armor like graffiti on a sacred temple. And most insulting of all, the personal mark of the mech boy who claimed ownership, a symbol declaring to all who see it that this dreadnought now belongs to an orc. The ancient warrior tries to focus his thoughts elsewhere, to retreat into memories or tactical considerations or anything that might distract from the ongoing violation. But his senses will not allow him to ignore what is happening. He can feel the weight of the paint being added to his armor. He can detect the chemical composition of the pigments through his olfactory senses. He can see, when the mech boys step back to admire their work, exactly how his sacred war machine is being transformed from a revered relic into an orc trophy. And through it all, he keeps returning to thoughts of the Emperor. What would the master of mankind think if he could see one of his warriors in this state? Would he feel pity for the ancient warrior's predicament? Would he feel rage at the Xenos who dare to defile one of his servants? Or would he simply see the situation as another example of the galaxy's cruelty, another instance of how things have gone wrong since his internment on the Golden Throne? The ancient warrior likes to think that the Emperor would feel something, that this situation would matter to the being who once commanded the Great Crusade and promised humanity a glorious future. But he knows, in the deepest parts of his consciousness, where uncomfortable truths cannot be avoided, that the Emperor is no longer capable of such thoughts. The being who sits upon the Golden Throne, sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psykers every day, maintaining the Astronomicon through sheer force of psychic will, is not the same person who stood before the assembled Astartes on Ulanor and spoke of enlightenment and unity. That Emperor, if he ever truly existed outside the ancient warrior's memories, is gone. What remains is something else, something that cannot concern itself with the fate of individual warriors, no matter how long they have served or how terrible their circumstances. This realization brings its own kind of pain. The ancient warrior has clung to his memories of the Emperor for 10,000 years, using them as an anchor point for his identity and a source of meaning for his existence. But what good are those memories when the being they commemorate no longer exists in the form remembered? What purpose does it serve to carry recollections of the Emperor's voice when that voice has been silent for millennia? What value is there in remembering the promise of a bright future when that future has been replaced with the grim darkness of the present? These are dangerous thoughts for a space marine to entertain, bordering on the kind of despair that the chaplains would call spiritual corruption. But the ancient warrior cannot help thinking them. His current situation, trapped in orc hands and being systematically debased, strips away the comfortable lies and self-deceptions that normally insulate consciousness from such dark conclusions. When everything you have built your identity around is being literally painted over by Xenos, when your connection to the past is being severed by crude greenskin hands, when your future consists of being paraded around as enemy loot, it becomes very difficult to maintain the fictions that usually make existence bearable. The mech boys finish their paint job and step back to admire their work. They grunt and gesture, clearly pleased with how the Dreadnought now looks. To their eyes, they have taken something that was boringly Imperial and made it properly Orky, adding the right colors and symbols to transform it from enemy technology into legitimate loot. They argue briefly about whether they should add more decorations, perhaps some chains or skulls or other trophies, but eventually decide that the current configuration is acceptable for now. They can always add more dakka and bling later if the mood strikes them. For the ancient warrior, seeing himself through the Dreadnought's external cameras and sensors, the transformation is complete. He no longer looks like a Space Marine Dreadnought. He looks like an Orc war machine, painted in their colors and marked with their symbols. The last visible connection to his chapter, to his past, to his identity as a servant of the Emperor, has been erased. What remains is a shell that looks like it belongs to the enemy, a body that bears no trace of the 10,000 years of service it represents. And yet, deep inside the sarcophagus, where his biological remains float in amniotic fluid, where his consciousness persists despite everything that has been done to his external form, the ancient warrior knows that he is still himself. The Orks can change his armor, can add their crude modifications, can paint over his chapter's colors, but they cannot change who he is. They cannot erase his memories of the Great Crusade. They cannot remove his knowledge of having stood in the Emperor's presence. They cannot touch the core of identity that makes him who he is, that defines him as more than just a war machine or a piece of Ork loot. This knowledge becomes his lifeline, the one thing he can hold on to when everything else has been stripped away. He is still himself. No matter what the Orks do to his body, no matter how they modify or defile or repurpose his war machine, his consciousness remains his own. He is still the warrior who fought at Ulanor. He is still the space marine who heard the Emperor speak. He is still the ancient one who carries memories spanning 10 millennia. The Orks have his body, but they do not have him. Not really. Not the part that matters most. He tries to retreat into his memories, to find solace in the past when the present has become unbearable. He remembers Ulanor, remembers the feel of that world under his feet when he still had feet to feel with. The planet had been transformed into a massive Ork fortress world, its surface covered with crude settlements and war factories that stretched from horizon to horizon. The sky had been choked with smoke from countless fires, the air thick with the sounds of industry and conflict even before the Imperial assault began. When the drop pods carrying the Space Marine legions crashed down onto that hostile soil, they came as angels of death, bringing the Emperor's judgment to a Xenos empire that had grown too large and too dangerous to ignore. The scale of the Ulanor Crusade had been unprecedented. Over 100,000 Space Marines deployed to a single world, representing multiple legions, working in coordination. The Lunar Wolves, the Blood, Angels, the Ultramarines, the White Scars, the Death Guard, and others, each bringing their unique approach to war, but all united under the Emperor's banner and the overall strategy he had devised. The ancient warrior had been part of this great host, one Space Marine among hundreds of thousands, yet he had felt singularly honored to participate in what everyone understood would be the defining battle of the Great Crusade. He remembers the sounds of battle, the thunder of artillery that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world, the distinctive crack of bolt rounds detonating in Ork flesh, the roar of jump packs as assault marines descended on enemy positions from above. He remembers the sight of titans striding across the battlefield, god machines whose very footsteps left craters, their weapons laying waste to entire Ork formations with single salvos. He remembers the endless tide of green bodies, Orks rushing forward with that characteristic mixture of enthusiasm and recklessness that made them such dangerous opponents. And he remembers the methodical way the Space Marine legions cut them down, turning Ork aggression against itself through superior tactics and discipline. But more than anything, more than all the tactical details and strategic movements and specific engagements, he remembers seeing the Emperor. Not from a distance, not as a golden figure barely visible across a battlefield, but actually close enough to perceive details, to see the master of mankind as something more than just a symbol. The Emperor had led from the front during key engagements, his presence on the battlefield serving to inspire the Imperial forces and dismay the enemy. The ancient warrior had been among the Space Marines providing close support during one such engagement, fighting alongside the Emperor himself against an Ork formation that had managed to create a salient in the Imperial lines. The memory of that experience remains vivid, even after 10,000 years, preserved with a clarity that other recollections lack. The Emperor had been magnificent in his wrath, a being of such power and presence that reality itself seemed to bend around him. He had wielded weapons that made the equipment carried by Space Marines look like toys by comparison, and he had fought with a skill and ferocity that transcended anything the ancient warrior had ever witnessed. Orks had died in their hundreds, their primitive weapons unable to penetrate the Emperor's armor, their crude tactics no match for his strategic genius. their numbers meaningless in the face of his overwhelming might. But it was not just the Emperor's combat prowess that had impressed the ancient warrior. It was the sense of purpose, the absolute certainty that radiated from him like heat from a star. When the Emperor spoke, his voice carried an authority that made obedience feel not like submission, but like willing participation in something greater than oneself. When he issued orders, they came, with such clear strategic reasoning that following them felt like the only rational course of action. And when he looked at his Space Marines, when his attention fell upon the warriors who fought in his name, there was a quality to that gaze that made each one feel simultaneously insignificant compared to his grandeur, and yet vitally important to his plans. The ancient warrior remembers the Emperor speaking to the assembled Astartes after the final victory on Ullanor. They had gathered in their hundreds of thousands, a sea of power-armored warriors representing the pinnacle of human military achievement. The Emperor had stood before them, his golden armor shining in the light of Ullanor's sun, and he had spoken of what they had accomplished and what yet remained to be done. He had praised their courage and their skill, acknowledging the sacrifices made and the challenges overcome. He had outlined his vision for the Imperium, describing a future where humanity would be united under a single banner, where superstition and ignorance would be replaced by reason and enlightenment, where mankind would take its rightful place as the dominant species in the galaxy. The ancient warrior had believed every word. Standing in that vast assembly, surrounded by brothers who had fought through the greatest battle the galaxy had ever seen, listening to the Emperor describe the destiny that awaited humanity, it had been impossible not to believe. The future the Emperor described was glorious, rational, achievable. It was a vision worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth sacrificing everything to achieve. And the Emperor himself, the being who stood before them radiating power and certainty, seemed capable of making that vision reality through sheer force of will. How naive that belief seems now. How tragically optimistic those dreams of enlightenment and unity appear from the perspective of the 41st millennium. The ancient warrior knows what happened next in the grand sweep of history. He knows that shortly after Ullanor, the Emperor withdrew from the Great Crusade to pursue his secret project on Terra, appointing Horus as War Master to command the continuing expansion. He knows that this decision, this seeming abandonment of the Great Crusade by its architect, planted seeds of resentment and doubt among the Primarchs. He knows that those seeds eventually grew into the Horus heresy, the catastrophic civil war that tore the Imperium apart and turned brother against brother. He knows that the Emperor never completed his great work, never achieved the vision he outlined on Ullanor. Instead of enlightenment, the Imperium descended into religious fanaticism, worshipping the Emperor as a god despite his own hatred of religion. Instead of unity, humanity remains fragmented and divided, the Imperium controlling vast swaths of the galaxy, but always on the defensive, always beset by enemies on all sides. Instead of the bright future the Emperor promised, there is only the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the slow decay of everything humanity once hoped to achieve. And yet, despite knowing all this, despite understanding how completely the Emperor's vision has failed to materialize, the ancient warrior still cherishes those memories of Ullanor. He still holds on to the recollection of seeing the Emperor in his glory, of hearing his voice describe a better future, of feeling certain that humanity's destiny lay in greatness rather than mere survival. Those memories represent something precious, a connection to a time when hope was real and victory seemed possible. They are proof that he once served something greater than the grinding, thankless warfare that characterizes the present age. They are evidence that the Imperium was founded on genuine ideals, rather than just the brutal pragmatism that sustains it now. But those precious memories are being tainted by his current situation. How can he take pride in having stood in the Emperor's presence when he is now being poured over by Ork mech boys? How can he value his service at Ullanor when that service has led him to this degrading end? The contrast between the glory of the past and the horror of the present is almost unbearable. A cognitive dissonance that threatens to fracture his consciousness if he dwells on it too long. So he tries not to dwell on it. He tries to compartmentalize, to keep his memories of the Emperor separate from his awareness of his current predicament, to maintain some mental space where the past remains unsullied by the present. The irony is not lost on him. He has survived for 10,000 years, endured through the Horus heresy and the scouring and the millennia of slow decline that followed, only to end up in this situation. All that time, all that sacrifice, all those memories of glory and purpose, reduced to this degrading end. If he still possessed the physical capacity to weep, he would. If he could speak without the Vox systems the Orks have disabled, he would scream his rage and despair to anyone who might listen. But he can do neither. He can only endure, trapped in silence and helplessness, while the Orks continue their work. The mech boys eventually complete their modifications. The Dreadnought is now thoroughly orkified, covered in additional armor and weapons, painted in garish colors, decorated with crude glyphs and trophies. They stand back to admire their handiwork, arguing good-naturedly about whether they should add more Dakar or if the current configuration is sufficiently impressive. The biggest mech boy, the one who claimed primary ownership of this prize, declares that it is time to test their creation properly. They will take it to the fighting pits, have it battle against other Ork war machines, and see if all their modifications have produced something truly worthy of being called proper loot. But there is one problem. The Dreadnought still responds sluggishly to Ork controls, the machine spirit resisting their attempts at manipulation even after all the rewiring and modifications. The mech boy makes a decision. They are going to try reconnecting the original pilot's neural interfaces, seeing if they can force him to operate the Dreadnought, while an Ork provides oversight and direction. It is a compromise solution, using the Imperial pilot's connection to the machine, but keeping Ork hands on the actual control systems. They open the sarcophagus again and begin reconnecting cables and neural interface ports. The sensation for the ancient warrior is overwhelming. Systems that have been dark suddenly flood back online. His senses expand dramatically as the Dreadnought's sensors reconnect to his consciousness. He can see again, not just the limited view provided by emergency systems, but the full awareness of the Dreadnought's visual and Auspex arrays. He can feel the weight and balance of the war machine, can sense the weapons and their ammunition loads, can detect every modification and addition the Orks have made to his body. And for just a moment, he considers rebellion. With his systems back online, with control pathways reconnected, perhaps he could override the Ork command inputs. Perhaps he could activate his weapons and turn them on his captors, spending his last moments taking as many greenskins with him as possible before they shut him down permanently. It would be a worthy end, a final act of defiance that would at least salvage some honor from this degrading situation. But before he can act on this impulse, the mech boys finish their work. They have installed crude limiters and overrides on his neural interfaces, systems that monitor his inputs and can shut him down if he attempts anything the Orks do not want. They have essentially turned him into a slave, forced to operate his own war machine, but under constant supervision and control. He can move the Dreadnought, can activate its weapons, but only when and how the Orks direct. Any attempt at independent action results in overwhelming pain as the crude Ork overrides punish what they interpret as defiance. This is the final degradation, the ultimate humiliation. The ancient warrior is now an unwilling servant of the Orks, forced to operate his own sacred war machine in service to the Xenos he has fought against for 10,000 years. His chapter's colors are buried under Ork paint. His weapons are supplemented with crude greenskin Dakar. His every movement is monitored and controlled by beings that represent everything he has spent his existence fighting against. He is a prisoner, a slave, a trophy that has been made to serve its captors. And yet, even in this darkest moment, the warrior does not surrender hope entirely, because he knows something that the Orks do not. He knows that his chapter will be looking for him. Space Marine. Chapters do not abandon their dreadnoughts lightly. These ancient warriors are too valuable, too important, too sacred to leave in enemy hands if there is any possibility of recovery. The chapter's tech marines will be using every resource at their disposal to locate their lost brother. The chapter master will be coordinating rescue operations, planning strikes against Ork positions to find and recover the missing dreadnought. His battle brothers will be scouring the war zone, investigating every lead and following every rumor that might point the way to their ancient comrade. The process of locating a missing dreadnought is complicated by numerous factors. The battlefield where he was lost may be vast and chaotic, with dozens or hundreds of Ork warbands operating in the area. The Orks themselves are constantly on the move, fighting each other and looting anything they can find, which means the dreadnought could be in any of dozens of different Ork camps or workshops. The chapter must also balance the desire to recover their ancient brother with the practical necessities of the campaign, unable to devote unlimited resources to a single rescue operation, no matter how important the target. But Space Marines are nothing if not persistent. They will not give up. As long as there is any chance that their brother still lives, they will launch raids against Ork positions, interrogate captured greenskins, track the movement of Ork mobs through the war zone. They will search tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that every moment their brother remains in Ork hands is another moment of degradation and horror for a warrior who has served the Emperor for 10 millennia. The ancient warrior clings to this knowledge like a drowning man clings to driftwood. His chapter will come for him. They will find him. They will rescue him from this nightmare and return him to the honored halls where he belongs. He holds on to this hope, even as the Orks parade him through their camp, showing off their prize to other greenskins who grunt and jeer and make crude comments about the puny Humie trapped inside the big metal body. He holds on to it, even when they force him to fight in their brutal pit matches, making him battle against other Ork war machines while they bet on the outcome and laugh at the spectacle. Those pit fights are particularly horrifying. The ancient warrior is forced to fight against death dreads and looted vehicles, and all manner of Ork war machines, his sophisticated systems pitted against crude greenskin engineering. He could easily win these fights if he were allowed to fight properly, to use his 10,000 years of tactical experience and combat expertise. But the Ork overrides limit him, force him to fight in specific ways that make the match more entertaining for the watching greenskins. He must pull his blows, must avoid killing strikes, must drag out the combat to provide maximum spectacle. It is degrading and humiliating, reducing a veteran of the Great Crusade to a performing animal for Ork amusement. And all the while, the ancient warrior can feel pieces of himself slipping away. The neural interfaces that connect him to the dreadnought were never designed to be tampered with in this way. The crude Ork modifications are causing damage, subtle but cumulative, to the delicate systems that keep his consciousness intact. His memories are beginning to fragment more severely than the normal slow decay of millennial existence. Events blur together. Names and faces fade more quickly than they should. Even his treasured memories of the Emperor are becoming less distinct, like images seen through murky water. He knows what is happening. The Ork modifications are killing him, not quickly, but slowly and inexorably. If he remains in their hands much longer, the damage will become irreparable. Even if his chapter manages to rescue him, even if they can restore him to proper functioning, he may find that too much has been lost. The ancient warrior who fought at Ulanor, who stood in the Emperor's presence, who carries memories spanning 10,000 years, might be reduced to a hollow shell with nothing left but fragments and shadows. But rescue does come, eventually. The chapter's relentless searching pays off. They locate the Ork camp where the ancient warrior is being held, piecing together intelligence from multiple sources to pinpoint his location. Interrogated Ork prisoners, when they can be made to talk before their natural belligerence leads to their deaths, provide fragments of information about a big prize the mech boys are working on. Reconnaissance operations identify unusual activity in a particular Ork settlement, the kind of concentrated effort that suggests something important is being worked on. Long-range Auspex scans detect energy signatures consistent with Dreadnought power systems, buried among the cruder Ork technology, but still distinct enough to be identified by trained tech marines. The chapter master weighs the information carefully. Mounting a rescue operation into the heart of Ork-controlled territory is risky. It will require committing significant resources, pulling assets away from other operations that are themselves critical to the overall campaign. There is no guarantee of success. The Orks might detect the incoming force and destroy the Dreadnought rather than allow it to be recaptured. The ancient warrior might already be dead, his consciousness finally unable to sustain itself through the trauma of captivity. The intelligence might be wrong, leading the rescue force into a trap or a wild goose chase while the actual Dreadnought remains hidden elsewhere. But despite all these risks, despite the strategic arguments against committing to this operation, the chapter master gives the order to proceed. This is not a decision made purely on tactical grounds. This is a matter of honor, of faith, of the values that define what it means to be a space marine. A brother is in enemy hands. A warrior who has served the Emperor for 10,000 years, who fought in the Great Crusade itself, who carries within his consciousness memories that span the entire history of the Imperium, is being held by Xenos. There is no calculation of risk versus reward that makes abandoning him acceptable. There is only the imperative to recover him, to bring him home, to ensure that his sacrifice and service are honored rather than ending in degradation and captivity. The rescue force is assembled with care. The chapter commits a full battle company to the operation, over 100 space marines who will form the core of the assault. They are supported by scouts who will provide reconnaissance and identify the best approach routes. Assault marines are included for their mobility and close-quarters combat capability. A tech marine is detailed specifically for the task of securing and extracting the Dreadnought once it is located. And commanding the entire operation is a veteran captain, a warrior whose tactical acumen is matched by his understanding of what this rescue means to the chapter. The planning phase is thorough and meticulous. The captain and his staff study every piece of intelligence about the Ork camp, identifying defensive positions, mapping out patrol routes, determining where the Dreadnought is most likely being held. They consider multiple approach vectors, weighing the advantages of speed against the need for stealth. They develop contingency plans for various scenarios. What if the Orks are more numerous than expected? What if the Dreadnought is too damaged to move under its own power? What if the enemy has set up the entire situation as a trap? They prepare for everything they can anticipate, knowing that no plan survives contact with the enemy, but that thorough preparation increases the chances of success. The approach to the Ork camp is conducted under cover of darkness, using the natural terrain to mask their movements. The scouts go first, eliminating Ork sentries with silenced weapons and close-quarters kills that leave no survivors to raise the alarm. The main force follows behind them, moving with practiced silence despite the weight of their power armor. They bypass several Ork outposts, choosing routes that avoid detection rather than fighting through every obstacle. Speed and surprise are more important than total elimination of threats. The objective is not to conquer the Ork camp, but to extract their ancient brother before the enemy can react. The final approach brings them to the edge of the camp. From their position, the Space Marines can see the ramshackle structures that pass for Ork architecture. Crude buildings thrown together from scrap metal and whatever materials were available. Smoke rises from fires and forges scattered throughout the settlement. The sounds of Ork activity fill the air, the constant background noise of a species that never truly rests. And somewhere in that chaotic sprawl of Xenos civilization is their ancient brother, waiting in darkness and hoping for rescue that might never come. The captain gives the order. Drop pods slam down into the center of the camp with the thunder of controlled atmospheric entry. The impact alone destroys several Ork structures, crushing them beneath tons of armored ceramite. Hatches blow open with explosive force, and Space Marines pour out into the enemy camp like avenging angels. Bolters open fire immediately, the distinctive crack of mass-reactive rounds detonating in Ork flesh audible even over the chaos of the assault. Flamers wash over enemy positions, turning greenskins into screaming torches. The attack is sudden, overwhelming, and utterly ruthless. The Orks respond with characteristic aggression, grabbing whatever weapons are close at hand and rushing toward the invaders with more enthusiasm than tactical sense. They boil out of their crude barracks and workshops, some fully armed and armored, others barely dressed and wielding improvised weapons. They charge forward with their distinctive battle cry, that guttural roar that has presaged violence on 1,000 worlds across the galaxy. They are numerous, they are fierce, and they are completely unprepared for the coordinated assault of a full Space Marine battle company. The fighting is intense, but one-sided. Space Marines are individually superior to Orks in nearly every measurable way. Their armor is better, their weapons more effective, their training more comprehensive, their discipline unshakable, where an Ork relies on size and aggression to carry the day. A Space Marine fights with practiced precision, every shot placed to maximize effect, every movement calculated to maintain tactical advantage. The numerical superiority the Orks might normally enjoy is negated by the surprise of the attack and the Space Marines' methodical advance through the camp. But numbers still matter, and the Orks have them in abundance. For every greenskin that falls, 2 more seem to appear from the sprawling camp. The Space Marines find themselves fighting not just the warriors who were initially present, but reinforcements arriving from other parts of the settlement, drawn by the sounds of battle and the promise of a good fight. The tactical situation threatens to devolve from a precision strike into a grinding melee, exactly the kind of engagement the rescue force was supposed to avoid. The captain makes a critical decision. He splits his force, leaving a strong holding element to maintain the perimeter and buying time while the strike team pushes deeper into the camp. The holding force digs in, creating defensive positions from the wreckage of destroyed Ork structures, establishing fields of fire that turn the approaches into killing grounds. They are outnumbered, but they are Space Marines, and they hold their ground with the grim determination that has characterized the Adeptus Astartes for 10,000 years. Meanwhile, the strike team advances toward the workshop, where intelligence suggests the Dreadnought is being held. They move quickly, cutting through Ork resistance with brutal efficiency. They bypass fights that would slow them down, leaving isolated pockets of enemies for the holding force to deal with. Their objective is singular and clear. Reach the workshop, secure the Dreadnought, and get out before the Orks can organize a coordinated counterattack that might overwhelm even Space Marine capabilities. They find resistance heaviest near the workshop itself. The mech boys who claim the Dreadnought have stationed guards around their prize, Ork warriors larger and better equipped than the mob that makes up most of the camp's population. These are the mech boys' personal retinue, greenskins who have thrown their lot in with the technical specialist in exchange for access to better weapons and equipment. They fight with the ferocity of Orks, combined with an unusual degree of coordination, actually working together to create defensive positions, rather than just charging forward individually. The strike team encounters heavy weapons fire. Big shooters rattle out streams of rounds that spark against ceramite armor. Rockets whoosh through the air, their crude guidance systems making them unpredictable but still dangerous. A Death Dread, one of the Ork equivalents to an Imperial Dreadnought, stomps forward with weapons blazing, its Ork pilot gleefully opening fire on the Space Marines. The scene devolves into close-quarters chaos, the kind of intense firefight where individual acts of heroism and split-second decisions determine who lives and who dies. A Space Marine goes down, his armor breached by concentrated fire, servos sparked and inoperative. Another takes a rocket to the chest, the blast sending him staggering back, but his armor holding against the crude munition. The Tech Marine, essential to extracting the Dreadnought, narrowly avoids being crushed by the Death Dread, rolling aside at the last moment while other Space Marines target the Ork war machine with concentrated fire. The fighting is vicious and desperate, both sides knowing that control of the workshop and its precious prize could determine the outcome of the entire operation. The Orks respond with their characteristic enthusiasm for violence. They pour out of their ramshackle buildings, grabbing whatever weapons are at hand, howling their crude battle cries. The camp erupts into chaos as Space Marines and Orks clash in brutal close-quarters combat. Buildings burn. Explosions rock the ground. The air fills with the thunder of gunfire and the screams of the dying. Through it all, the Space Marines advance with methodical precision toward their objective. The ancient warrior can sense the battle through his senses. He recognizes the sounds of bolter fire, the distinctive crack of explosive rounds detonating in flesh. He knows those are his brothers fighting out there, coming to rescue him from his captivity. Hope surges through his consciousness for the first time in however long he has been in Ork hands. They have come for him. They have not abandoned him. Even after everything he has endured, his chapter still values him enough to risk this operation. The mech boys who claimed ownership of the Dreadnought realize what is happening. They try to activate him, to use their prize in the defense of the camp. But the ancient warrior, seeing his chance, fights against the Ork control systems with everything he has. He knows the pain will be overwhelming, knows that the crude overrides will punish his defiance, but he does not care. His brothers are here. He will not, cannot allow himself to be used as a weapon against them. He would rather suffer any torture than harm his own chapter. The Orks curse and slam their crude controls, trying to force the Dreadnought into action. Warning lights flash across the sarcophagus as the ancient warrior's resistance triggers the punishment protocols the mech boys installed. Pain, abstract and terrible, floods through what remains of his nervous system. But he endures it. He has endured worse. He has survived 10,000 years of existence as a Dreadnought, has carried the weight of memories from the Great Crusade, has maintained his identity through millennia that would have destroyed lesser minds. He can endure this too. The Space Marines breach the workshop where the Dreadnought is being held. They cut down the mech boys with precise bursts of bolter fire, their weapons speaking the Emperor's judgment against those who would dare defile one of his ancient servants. A tech marine rushes forward to examine the captured Dreadnought, his augmented eyes scanning the desecration the Orks have performed, his mechadendrites already reaching out to begin disconnecting the crude Ork modifications. The ancient warrior feels gentle, knowing hands working on his systems. These are not the crude probings of Ork mech boys, but the precise manipulations of a trained tech marine, someone who understands the sacred mysteries of the Dreadnought's construction. The Ork overrides are carefully removed. The crude control systems are disconnected and discarded. Slowly, methodically, the tech marine works to restore the Dreadnought to something approaching proper function. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the ancient warrior feels his control pathways fully restore. He can move freely again, can activate his weapons without Ork interference. For the first time since his capture, he is truly himself again, a Space Marine Dreadnought rather than an Ork puppet. He takes a tentative step forward, feeling the familiar weight and balance of his war machine responding to his will. The sensation is indescribable after the horror of being controlled by Xenos. The tech marine steps back, his work for the moment complete. The ancient warrior looks around the Ork workshop through his visual senses, seeing the crude tools and ramshackle equipment that were used to defile his sacred form. He feels rage building in his consciousness, a cold and terrible anger at what was done to him. But there is no time for vengeance now. The Space Marines are already preparing to withdraw, having accomplished their objective. The ancient warrior is loaded onto a transport for extraction, surrounded by battle brothers who stand guard to ensure no Ork attack can reclaim their prize. As the transport lifts off and the Ork camp recedes below them, the ancient warrior has time to truly process what he has endured. He has been captured by Orks, examined and modified like a piece of scrap metal, forced to serve as their puppet and their entertainment. He has experienced degradation that no space marine should ever have to endure. The memory of it will haunt him for however long his consciousness endures, a stain on his honor that can never be fully erased. But he also knows that he survived. Despite everything the Orks did to him, despite the modifications and the control systems and the forced pit fights, his core identity remained intact. He is still himself, still the ancient warrior who fought at Ullanor, still the consciousness that carries memories of the Emperor and the Great Crusade. The Orks may have defiled his body, may have forced him to serve their crude purposes, but they could not break his spirit. In that, at least, he has achieved a kind of victory. The journey back to the chapter's fortress monastery is long enough for the ancient warrior to truly take stock of the damage. The Tech Marine's initial work has restored basic function, but the Dreadnought will require extensive repairs to return it to proper operational status. The Ork modifications have left their mark, crude additions that must be carefully removed and replaced with proper Imperial components. The paint job will need to be stripped entirely, the sacred livery of the chapter restored to its rightful place. And most concerning, the neural interfaces have been damaged in ways that might not be fully repairable. When they finally arrive at the fortress monastery, the ancient warrior is taken immediately to the Tech Marine's workshops. This is a very different place from the Ork mech shop where he was held captive. Here, everything is precise and orderly. Sacred tools hang in their proper places. Blessed unguents and holy oils stand ready for use. Servo skulls drift through the air, their sensor arrays recording every detail for the chapter's archives. This is where the true work of restoration will begin. The Tech Marines approach their task with reverence and care. They understand that they are working not just on a piece of equipment, but on a revered brother, an ancient warrior who has served the chapter and the Emperor for 10,000 years. They begin by carefully documenting everything the Orks did, recording the modifications and desecrations, both for practical purposes and to ensure that such violations are not forgotten. Then, they begin the painstaking process of undoing the damage. The Ork additions are removed with great care. Each crude armor plate, each bolted-on weapon mount, each garish decoration is taken off and set aside. Some of the components will be kept, not for use, but as evidence of what was done, relics of a dark chapter in the ancient warrior's long existence. The paint is stripped using sacred solvents and blessed tools, revealing underneath the original livery that marked this dreadnought as an honored servant of the chapter. Layer by layer, the orkification is undone, and the dreadnought begins to look like itself again. But some damage cannot be so easily repaired. The neural interfaces that the Orks tampered with are complex and delicate, their function dependent on precise calibration and careful maintenance. The crude Ork overrides cause damage at the microscopic level, severing connections and corrupting systems in ways that even the chapter's most skilled Tech Marines struggle to fully understand. They do their best, replacing damaged components and recalibrating systems, but they cannot restore everything to how it was before. Some of the ancient warrior's sensory acuity is permanently diminished. Some of his control pathways remain slightly impaired, and some of his memories, already fragmented by millennia of existence, have been damaged further by the trauma of what he endured. The psychological impact of his captivity is harder to assess and impossible to fully repair. The ancient warrior finds himself haunted by memories of his time in Ork hands. He dreams, when the Tech Marines put him into dormancy for maintenance, of mech boys pouring at his sarcophagus. He experiences phantom sensations of Ork control systems overriding his will. He finds himself tensing whenever he hears certain sounds that remind him of the workshop where he was held. This is not something that can be fixed with replacement parts or recalibration. This is damage to the consciousness itself, wounds to the spirit that even the most advanced Imperial technology cannot heal. The chapter's chaplains visit him during his restoration, offering words of comfort and reminders of his duty. They assure him that what happened was not his fault. that no dishonor attaches to a warrior who is captured and forced to endure enemy captivity. They remind him of his service, of his long history of faithfulness to the Emperor and the chapter, of the value his continued existence represents. They tell him that he is still needed, still valued, still a vital part of the chapter's heritage and identity. These words help, providing some measure of comfort, but they cannot erase what happened or make the memories less painful. When the restoration is finally complete, when the last Ork modification has been removed and the last system recalibrated, the ancient warrior is returned to the halls where the chapter's dreadnoughts rest between deployments. He takes his place among his fellow ancient ones, these warriors who have endured for centuries or millennia in service to the Emperor. They greet his return with what passes for joy among those who have lost so much of their humanity to time and transformation. They understand what he has endured because they too have suffered their own trials and tribulations across the long years. But the ancient warrior finds that he is changed in ways both subtle and profound. His time in Ork captivity has left marks that go deeper than physical damage. He finds himself less willing to speak of the glory days of the Great Crusade, less eager to share his memories of the Emperor. Those memories feel tainted now, contaminated by association with the degradation he suffered. How can he speak of standing in the Emperor's presence when he also carries memories of being paraded through an Ork camp like a trained animal? How can he take pride in his service at Ullanor when he also remembers being forced to fight in greenskin pit matches for their amusement? He also finds himself struggling with a kind of fear he has never experienced before in his long existence. The thought of being deployed to battle against Orks fills him with something approaching dread. He knows intellectually that the chances of being captured again are minuscule, that his chapter will never again allow him to be in a situation where such an outcome is possible. But the rational knowledge does not prevent the visceral reaction, the spike of something like panic when he contemplates facing greenskins on the battlefield. The chapter's chaplains work with him on these issues, helping him to process what happened and integrate it into his understanding of himself. They remind him that even the greatest warriors can experience fear, that acknowledging such emotions is not weakness, but wisdom. They encourage him to view his survival as a testament to his strength rather than his captivity as a mark of shame. Slowly, over the course of months and years, the ancient warrior begins to heal psychologically, even as his physical restoration is completed. Eventually, inevitably, he is called to battle again. The chapter faces a threat that requires the deployment of its dreadnoughts, and the ancient warrior is among those chosen to fight. He awakens from dormancy to find that the enemy is not Orks, but Chaos Space Marines, traitors who have turned from the Emperor's light to serve the dark gods. This comes as a relief. He is ready to fight, ready to prove to himself and others that his captivity has not broken him, but he is grateful that his first deployment will not force him to immediately confront the source of his trauma. The battle is fierce, as all battles in the grim darkness of the far future tend to be. The ancient warrior fights with the skill and ferocity that has characterized his service for 10,000 years. His weapons speak death to the traitors. His armor turns aside their attacks. He moves through the battlefield like the walking embodiment of the Emperor's wrath, crushing heretics beneath his feet and shredding them with his assault cannon. To his battle brothers, he appears unchanged, still the same ancient and revered warrior he has always been. But inside his sarcophagus, the ancient warrior knows the truth. He is changed. His time in Ork captivity has left scars that will never fully heal. His memories of the Emperor and the Great Crusade, once sources of pure pride and inspiration, are now complicated by association with more recent trauma. He is not broken, but he is not the same either. He has been tested in a way few warriors ever are, forced to endure degradation and helplessness while maintaining his sanity and identity. He has survived, and in that survival found a strength he did not know he possessed. As he fights, as his weapons tear through enemy ranks, and his armor deflects incoming fire. The ancient warrior makes a decision. He will not allow what happened to him to define him. He will not let the Orks have that victory. He is more than his captivity, more than the sum of his traumas. He is a warrior who fought at Ulanor, who stood in the Emperor's presence, who has served faithfully for 10,000 years. Those truths are more fundamental to his identity than anything the Orks did to him. He will carry the memories of his captivity, yes, but he will carry them as he carries all his other memories, as parts of a whole that is larger than any single experience. The battle ends in Imperial victory. The Chaos Space Marines are driven back, their forces shattered and scattered. The ancient warrior and his battle brothers stand victorious on a field of the dead, their duty done, their honor intact. As he is prepared for the return to dormancy, as the Tech Marines begin the rituals that will send him back into the dreamless sleep between deployments, the ancient warrior allows himself a moment of satisfaction. He has fought again. He has proven that he is still the warrior he always was. The Orks may have captured his body for a time, but they could not capture his spirit. That remains, as it has always been, in service to the Emperor and the Imperium. And in the end, perhaps that is the lesson of this entire ordeal. The true measure of a warrior is not whether he falls, but whether he rises again. The ancient warrior fell into Ork hands, endured degradation and horror, suffered in ways no space marine should ever have to suffer. But he survived. He was rescued. He was restored. And he returned to battle, carrying with him not just the scars of his ordeal, but also the knowledge that he has the strength to endure even the most nightmarish situations imaginable. His story becomes a part of the chapter's lore, whispered among the battle brothers as a reminder of both the dangers they face and the resilience they possess. It is a tale of horror, yes, but also a tale of survival and recovery. It speaks to the importance of never abandoning fallen brothers, of fighting to recover them no matter the odds. It demonstrates the value the chapter places on its dreadnoughts, these ancient warriors who serve as living links to the past. And it reminds everyone who hears it that even in the grim darkness of the far future, even when facing fates that transcend death, the human spirit, even one housed in a machine and sustained for millennia, can endure. The ancient warrior continues his service, awakening for battles across the centuries that follow. Each time he emerges from dormancy, he finds a galaxy that has changed in small ways, enemies that evolve and adapt, battles that require the wisdom of experience and the strength of ancient resolve. He fights against Orks again, eventually, and finds that his fear has transformed into something else. Not hatred, precisely, for that would give the Xenos too much power over his thoughts, but a cold determination to ensure that what happened to him never happens to another of his brothers. When he faces greenskins on the battlefield, he fights with particular ferocity, driven by memories of captivity transformed into fuel for vengeance. So if you found this exploration of what happens when Orks capture a dreadnought who met the Emperor enlightening, if you enjoyed diving deep into this nightmare scenario and understanding the full horror and ultimate resilience it represents, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories from the grim darkness of the far future waiting to be told. More explorations of the lore and legends that make Warhammer 40,000 such a rich and compelling universe. The Ancient Warrior's tale is just one among countless others, each one a testament to the endurance of the human spirit even in the face of overwhelming darkness. Thanks for listening, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also the stubborn refusal to surrender that keeps humanity fighting against impossible odds.